Good afternoon. I want to begin by answering the big question that people have been asking in the last 48 hours, and that is this government asking you, the people, the public, to do one thing, while senior people here in government do something else? Have we been asking you to make sacrifices to obey social distancing, stay at home, while some people have been basically flouting those rules and endangering lives? And it's because I take this matter so seriously, and frankly, it is so serious, that I can tell you today I've had extensive face-to-face conversations with Dominic Cummings, and I've concluded that in travelling to find the right kind of childcare, at the moment when both he and his wife were about to be incapacitated by coronavirus, and when he had no alternative, I think he followed the instincts of every father and every parent, and I do not mark him down for that. And though there have been many other allegations about what happened when he was in self-isolation and thereafter, some of them palpably false, I believe that in every respect he has acted responsibly and legally and with integrity, and with the overwhelming aim of stopping the spread of the virus and saving lives. And I stress this fundamental aim because it's thanks to this country's collective resolve in achieving that aim that we continue to make progress. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home, because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households. That is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes: shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible, one form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household, any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person, and travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home. That's all. 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 These are the only reasons you should leave your home. You should not be meeting friends. If your friends ask you to meet, you should say no. You should not be meeting family members who do not live in your home. You should not be meeting family members who do not live in your home.
You should not be meeting family members who do not live in your home.
You should not be going shopping except for essentials like food and medicine. And you should do this as little as you can. And use food delivery services where you can. If you don't follow the rules, the police will have the powers to enforce them, including through fines and dispersing gatherings.
Conservative MPs have got in touch with us today, Prime Minister, because they say lots of their constituents are angry. They feel that allowing somebody who was already ill to travel 250 miles across the country breaches at least the spirit of your guidance. Hand on heart, can you really say that this didn't breach the spirit of your guidance? When were you told that Dominic Cummings was making this trip, and did you approve that trip? And can I also ask another question, just in case I get muted again? And that is this. You said that some of the stories in the press were palpably untrue. Can you clear up one story which your ministers and indeed your press officers haven't been able to clear up? Did Dominic Cummings make a trip to Barnard Castle in April when he was isolating, or at least was based, in Durham?
Right. Well, Ian, what I can tell you is that I think when you look at the guidance, when you look at the particular childcare needs that Mr. Cummings faced at the time, it was reasonable of him to self-isolate, as he did, for 14 days or more with his family where he did. And I think that was sensible and defensible, and I understand it. And as for all the other allegations, again, I just repeat what I've said earlier on. I've looked at them carefully, and I'm content that at all times throughout his period in isolation, actually on both sides of that period, he behaved responsibly and correctly and with a view to defeating the virus and stopping the spread.
But some Conservative MPs are saying, Prime Minister, that this defence that Dominic Cummings behaved responsibly, many of their constituents are angry about that.
Yes, well, let me just say...
As though they were irresponsible in not breaching the guidelines and going somewhere close, perhaps to their family during this lockdown, and they feel insulted by that. So what would you like to say to their constituents? Because that's where the postbag is coming in.
Of course,
their constituents
I understand that. I understand that.
Out at that kind of language.
I understand that, and I think that one of the reasons it's so important, and one of the reasons I was so determined to come and talk to everybody about this, is because I can totally get why people might feel so confused and, as you say, so offended by the idea that it was one thing for people here and another thing for others. But really, having looked at what happened, having looked at his intentions and what he was trying to do for the good of his family, I really think most people will understand what he was doing, and above all, what he did. If you look at the measures that he took, they were designed to stop the spread of the virus. And I think that he, at all times, as I say, behaved responsibly and legally. Though, Ian, I perfectly accept the point that you make, and that's why it's so important. That's why I wanted to come out and make these points this afternoon.
Ian is with me now. Did you get the answers you were after?
We got some of them, actually. The Prime Minister has strongly defended Dominic Cummings, so when many Conservative MPs were saying actually they wanted him to go, some of them crossed swords, of course, with Dominic Cummings in the past. They have dogs in the fight, but they've been saying it's time for him to go. His future is effectively clouding the government's future. They're having a cabinet meeting tomorrow to discuss easing the lockdown. If we're discussing Dominic Cummings, that's a bad thing. So we got a clear answer from the Prime Minister. He wants to keep him. Elsewhere, on some of the specifics, perhaps not so much. So he'd said that some of the stories in the press were palpably untrue, and I was interested in which of those stories were palpably untrue. Downing Street's denied, for example, claims in the Observer and the Mirror that Dominic Cummings went up and down to Durham and not just simply hunkering down there for a period of isolation. They have never specifically denied, though, that they made a 60-mile round trip from Durham to the town of Barnard Castle, for example, where a member of the public said he'd spotted him, noted down his number plate and all the rest of it. And, of course, this was at a time when the government was discouraging inessential travel. So that's been relaxed a bit since, but at that time, people were encouraged to stay pretty close to home, to go for one form of exercise a day, and not to do any unnecessary journeys. And the Prime Minister simply said that he was satisfied, either side of isolation, that Dominic Cummings had behaved responsibly, but we did not get a direct answer as to whether he'd made that particular trip.
Zooming out a little bit, stopping the virus in general seems to be all about public behaviour. So will this story about Dominic Cummings, one way or the other, affect that behaviour? Well,
I think, again, that's a concern across the political spectrum to an extent, but you would expect opponents to raise difficult issues for the government. I think what was interesting was people contacting me who are Conservative MPs, and not normally we'd probably try and contact them, but on this occasion I got quite a lot of incoming. They were coming to us unsolicited and saying actually there were real fears. Several of them saying that effectively their inboxes were creaking from angry constituents. And one of the things they seem to be, in fact, there's two issues. Some of the constituents feel resentful that perhaps they had abided by what they thought were the rules, and a more liberal interpretation were put on them by Downing Street, by Boris Johnson, by Dominic Cummings. But the other worry of some Conservative MPs is that simply this becomes a kind of green light for people to take their own attitude to lockdown. And the reason that becomes so important is when the government is ready to try and ease lockdown further from June the 1st, they're discussing it this week, the Cabinet meets tomorrow, they need people to stick to the guidance, because if the so-called R rate, the rate at which the virus spreads, goes up, then they'll have to slam on the brakes. And there is a real fear amongst some Conservative MPs, I'm not saying it's a majority view, but some, that effectively the lockdown has been undermined or is in effect over.